So welcome to Good Business Colorado's Level Up Academy, first event of its kind. So we are looking forward to a really interactive session. I've got Katie Huey here, who's leading the charge today. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Katie to get started.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. My name is Katie Huey. Hopefully you are trying to find the virtual room where we're going to talk about harnessing the power of healthy conflict for better results. I am the Client Success Coordinator at Trebuchet Group, and we are an organizational improvement firm out of Fort Collins. So just an hour north of probably where most of you are. If you have the ability to turn on your camera today, I would love to see you. I often joke that it's weird walking into a meeting with everyone having a bag on their head, and sometimes that's what it feels like in these Zoom sessions. So I know people are juggling a lot, and it's okay if you need to not be present with us with your camera on, but would love to see your face. We also will be using, I think, the Huey app for Q&A, and Stacy's so kindly going to be answering questions. So I'm going to just jump right in. Today, I'm going to be talking about an important skill that helps people thrive at work. So at Trebuchet Group, we want a world where everyone is thriving individually and collectively at work. And that looks like a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The world of work is changing, and we know that healthy conflict can be a powerful tool in helping us move towards that thriving. So first, we're going to be talking about what is conflict. Sometimes people think that that's kind of a bad word, especially at work. We'll look at the different conflict styles, how you are approaching tough situations, and then some strategies that you can use both as a leader and a member of a team to help your organization move better together forward. So, what is conflict? At this point, when you think of conflict, I'm curious what words or feelings arise in you. And I think we're a small enough group, you can just come off mute and share out loud if you're willing.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I would say disagreement.
Yeah, thanks.
I would say like holding your breath, being, tight in your body.
Sorry, it definitely has that somatic response as well. Is there anywhere specific that you're feeling it?
I think just even thinking about conflict for me, I kind of close up in my heart, my chest, that's what I'll share for now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really common response, especially in our American culture. So we believe that conflict is a condition in which the concerns of team members appear to be incompatible. You and I might disagree. We might be moving in different directions. It's any opportunity where there is a gap in understanding or a gap in experience. There has to be two conditions necessary. There's a difference and there's an interdependence. So if you and I disagree and we don't have to work together, it really doesn't matter. But if we're interdependent in our relationship and we need to be on the same page, then conflict is going to be the result of that. So a lot of times, too, especially in regards to this definition of conflict, we talk about what influences your conflict style. So I'm going to start first with work. There's personal experiences that have taught us how to show up, especially in the face of disagreement. But you can also rewind and go back to what were some of the early messages you received about conflict. Maybe it was a teacher or a parent or a grandparent that subtly taught you how to behave in the face of disagreement. We often talk about this idea of baggage. And I like to think about it a little bit different. We all bring a box with us wherever we go. And in that box are experiences, good and bad. So let's put another reframe just on this idea of baggage as well. But when you think about what influences your conflict style, even these words about disagreement or like a tightness in your chest, what else in your own experiences has played into how you're understanding conflict? Fear of public speaking, conflict, interdependence. Okay. Well, these are things to think about as we go through these different styles, and you can think about how it applies to you as well. I keep losing my mouse. I'm sorry about this. All right, here we go. So quite often, especially in the workforce, we think about conflict on a spectrum. On the far side would be personal attacks. Perhaps you've had an experience in a boardroom or a tense meeting where people are raising their voices, pointing fingers, getting their needs met in ways that are really uncomfortable. We also look at behavior that is someone else's fault. This is all on you. And then on the other side of that spectrum is this idea of false harmony, kind of this leave it to beaver, everything's fine. When we're together, we're going to smile and get through it. But then in the hallways, you're going to hear your coworker say, I can't believe so-and-so did this. We also call this the disease of niceness. At times, in service of caring for one another, we actually don't talk about what's really bothering us. And a lot of times we think that it's got to be an either or, but we believe that that's a false choice. You have different ways of being where we can actually look at how do we mine for conflict in a way that is going to elevate what's not being said and not make it personal. We want to have opportunities to clarify a degree of understanding and commitment and trust between team members. So I think if I ask for a share of hands, many of us could put up our hands with this idea of experiences of negative conflict. And a result of that is really like poor decisions or no decisions. How many of you have been in meetings where you spin and spin because no one can make a decision? A lot of times time and energy is wasted, relationships get damaged, or this idea of apathy. Tomorrow we're doing a session on quiet quitting too, and I think many people in the workforce just feel beaten down, like why should I care? But the opposite side of that is if you're moving towards positive conflict, issues can be surfaced and resolved in a respectful way. Everyone's had a chance to say what they need to say. And you get high quality decisions from varied perspectives. Relationships are strengthened, and we believe that this is key to have a strong, effective team. So this is kind of a summary, but highly productive teams engage in positive, healthy conflict around concepts and ideas rather than individual attacks, creating greater solutions than any one person can create alone. And in today's working world, we know that teams need different things. So this chart can be a helpful reminder just for yourself as you're thinking about what would I see or hear that would help indicate if this conflict is healthy or unhealthy. And I'm not going to read each line item, but this kind of summarizes that difference that we've been talking about. So what do teams need? In our current world of work, we often need timely decisions. Most of us are strapped on time. We need to resolve conflict constructively and new ideas. And if there's not an environment of trust, those new ideas are not going to come to the forefront. We also need this idea of buy-in, and we're going to get to that a little bit too. What's the difference between consensus and commitment? And to build relationships. Quite often, many of us feel very alone at work, and conflict can help with that too. And decisions that stick. How many of us have experienced what I like to call the water cooler effect, where you make a decision and then, 20 minutes later, you're all standing around going, well, wait a minute, how come we made that choice? So conflict can be a tool to help move us in that direction. And we use the Thomas Kilmann inventory, which is an assessment that looks at 5 different types of conflict styles, and these are informed both by personal and professional experiences, but they're really looking at how you show up in the face of conflict. And I want to do a quick disclaimer too. As with all assessments, I think it's really easy to fall into this trap of like, oh, I am a compromiser. or I am an avoider. We like to believe that you may have these different styles. So you can challenge me and I'll challenge you too in the questions to say, rather than, oh, he behaves that way because he's a compete style. It's no, I have compete strengths, and I'm going to use those in different ways that might be different than someone else on your team. So try not to use these labels in a punitive way and box your own self in, even though we're going to be looking at these boxes together over these next few minutes. So there's this axis, and one way to think about these different styles is how much you're putting the needs of you or your team first versus other needs. And we're going to get into these different styles and kind of what some of the descriptors are for each of these. So people with compete style are great at advocating for their needs. They also often believe that it's up to you to bring up your own. Our COO has a compete style, and she is fantastic at advocating for things, especially in regards to our budget or making sure that we're making choices that are financially sound. She also can at times come across a little bit intimidating. But for me, I've had to learn that she believes that I am whole and capable as well. And if I can challenge her, that's welcome. But otherwise, she's going to assume that I've got what I need. People with collaborate styles are really good at surfacing everyone's needs and looking for the win-win. Compromisers are pragmatic and find the middle ground. Oftentimes they're looking for the solution that's going to be quick and make both sides happy. People with avoid styles have a tendency to just believe that some things aren't worth bringing up. The relationship is going to be more important. Let's just get back to work in service of what we need to do. And people with accommodate styles often put the relationship first. So the relationship is more important than getting my own way. And as you look at these different words too, it's easy to assign kind of hidden value to each of these things. And when you think about it in a leadership context, avoid often seems weak. Compete is a word that we use to celebrate strength. And that's really not our intention. It's not a better than or less than. And we're going to look at some of these strengths and weaknesses of both of these styles. But before I get into kind of what those strengths and overdone qualities are there any questions about this framework first? So I'm going to give you a few seconds just to jot down some notes. If you've got paper or maybe you're taking some notes in a Google Doc, what conflict style do you use most often? And what were the early messages that you received about conflict? How has that impacted the styles you use? Same question with your personal experience or professional experiences, excuse me. So jot down those things. And if you are willing to bravely share with the group, I'm curious what rises to the surface in your own experience. Anyone willing to share what conflict styles rise to the surface for them? I know in my experience, I am a person with strong accommodate strengths. I often put the relationship first. I'm an eldest child who's at times used to commanding a room. But I had a younger sibling who's very good at getting his needs met. And I was great at kind of folding over to what he needed. So I think about one of those personal experiences that informs that. I often find myself too in support roles in organizations where I tend to put others' needs first. And I can do that until I can't. And then I get really frustrated. So that's that point of overdone as well. So think about that, what's showing up for you as we move forward too. So some of the strengths of each style, like I had talked about with people with compete styles, they often have a clear stance. You're going to know where they stand. And they want people to make fast decisions, face the issue. Many people with this style may be perceived as no nonsense. People with collaborate styles bring in diverse views and are looking for the long-term resolution. People who tend to compromise or have compromise styles provide moderation and balance for the group. They're usually the people that are like, well, wait a minute, have you thought about this perspective? And they're good at helping teams get past deadlocks by finding a middle ground solution. People with avoid styles are really good at managing time costs. Sometimes it's not worth belaboring a decision. Let's just move forward. And they steer clear of issues that might take up more time than it's worth. And people with accommodate styles are good at building goodwill and cohesiveness on the group, and they often work to restore harmony in individual relationships and for the team. And with all of these things, there's kind of a dark side too. You can do these styles, let's say, they can be overdone. Oftentimes, people who have compete styles might be seen or perceived as monopolizing a conversation, not listening or attacking others. Collaboration takes a ton of time. Our CEO has strong collaboration strengths, and at times we just want him to make a decision. Overanalyzing and those people can also be perceived as avoiding responsibility. Kind of going back to that CEO point of like, isn't this your job? Can you please just make a choice so we can move on? People who have compromised styles, it might be seen as rushing to settle. Like, can we just make a decision on behalf of everybody? But the problem with compromising too is even though you're finding a win-win, it also means that you're likely finding a lose-lose. Each side has to give up a little bit to find a compromise. Again, going back to the avoid style, you might miss meetings. People might be perceiving you as not having an opinion or that you're withholding information. And for the accommodate box, it can be perceived as shading the truth or bending the rules or sacrificing. And I know for myself, when I over accommodate, I get frustrated. That's where like the resentment comes in. And I feel like I'm sacrificing for the larger group. So I am curious for the group, and this is where I guess audience participation is hoped for. If you can share an example of where you've seen these conflict styles in action. Sarah just posted in the chat, thanks. I have found myself coming from all these styles at times and depending on the team, supervisor, and environment, though collaboration is what I strive for. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. Work culture and team environment can really play into this. Who else? Where have you seen these conflict styles in action?
I guess I can share. I just think in group meetings or in leadership meetings, in my organization, which is a nonprofit organization, it tends to be a little bit more collaborative, and hearing from everybody is important. And it does take a lot of time to make a decision, and often it is not settled at the end of a meeting.
Yeah, you got to come back to it. That's really common in nonprofits for sure.
I was going to say something that I witness is when people come together to like across departments and they're wrestling with an issue, and it reminds me of even marriage counseling, but it becomes like us versus each other versus like us and the issue. And people are coming in with these various competing conflict styles, and without that awareness, then people are judging and perceiving, the person and their conflict style, and that's really getting in the way of effective decision making and group work.
Yeah, going back to that idea of personal attacks rather than we're on the same team against an idea. What industry are you in?
Nonprofit.
Okay.
I see avoid overused. And then I think the compete style being used particularly, I'm interested in knowing even if there is some sort of a study that takes a look at how the distribution across communities and populations. But I think ultimately where a lot of this rests is, I wonder how much of it when we think about power, what actual conflict styles exist in a distribution of a population, and then in terms of avoid, what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a layer that I don't think the assessment that we use speaks to, although the sociologist in me could certainly make some conjectures. So I'm going to transition into some different strategies that we recommend on teams, and some things that get in the way too. A lot of times bias, and I think you just named a really beautiful example too, is like power and privilege and how that's coming into play in teams. We talk a lot about the fundamental attribution error. So it's easy to look at this picture of this really tired parents and think, wow, this room is a mess. They're neglecting their children. They're lazy. What's going on? Or we can look at the picture and think, this house is a mess. These parents must be overworked and need some support. So the fundamental attribution error is that a person's action, we often think a person's actions depend on what kind of a person that is, rather than the social and environmental forces that influence that person. And when we're looking at team dynamics, there's a lot of layers that get in the way. I think you named a beautiful one with power and authority, hierarchy, who has access to decisions. And it is our goal to use kind of this framework around, what do I know to be true about myself and what do I know to be true about others, that can help me show up the best I can in the system that I find myself in. So this bias often gets in the way. And I think we're not going to unpack systemic oppression in the next 20 minutes, but one thing that can really help, especially as we're coming into team conversations, is assuming positive intent. We often start conversations with, why would a rational, kind, and caring person act this way? And how can I shift my mental models to believe that this is true of other people? I think it's really easy. You're driving in traffic, that guy cuts you off, and like, what a jerk, or other expletives. And then all of a sudden you find out he's on his way to the hospital because his wife is in labor. So you're going to have different stories and associations that we bring to the different experiences. But if you can come at it from, why would a rational, kind, and caring person act this way? Assuming we all have the best interest of each other in mind. And I know, depending on the different organizations and again, positions of power, there are many barriers that get in the way of that mental model. So this is a hard one to practice, and individual situations may require more coaching into how you can use your conflict styles there. The other thing that we do with teams is create conflict norms. So based on the demographics of who is in the room, or what teams are the people that are a part of the team, we use this assessment and then figure out, what do we know to be true about our styles in this group? And we create what we call like rules of engagement, or norms that we're going to hold each other to for meetings and situations and decisions. And this example here actually came from one of our city partners. So this is a real client example. But these are the lists of norms that they committed to when they were going to have tough decisions. So get clarity, check commitment, and establish next steps. That can be really helpful for people with avoid styles. Be curious about others' intent, share the impact on you, keep it about the topic, not about the individual. That's very specific to trying to avoid personal attacks. Not a spectator sport, participate. I'm going to guess too that this group has a lot of people with avoid styles in it. So by adding that in, we're saying we all agree to speak up. You don't get just to sit by and watch. Provide info in advance and prepare. I think that probably is honoring both people with the compete styles who want to make decisions quickly, and the accommodators, or people with accommodate styles who might want to make have more time before they can commit to a decision. Agree to disagree, commitment over consensus. So I think that's an idea too, both in service of those with compete styles and those who like to have compromise as their leading style. We have lots of examples of these different things that people can choose from too. So if you're curious about creating your own conflict norms for the group, like let's have a conversation. Just reading the notes in the chat. High collaboration. Yeah, brainstorm before negotiating. And I think that too gets a lot of ideas on the table that maybe wouldn't be there already. At Trebuchet Group, we love using what we call the thumb check. So a lot of times you might hear about getting consensus. Let's get group consensus before we can make a decision. And we like to switch that a little bit to say, let's get commitment. Oftentimes I can commit to something even if I don't fully agree. So if you've got your thumbs up, and this is a tool we'll use like at the end of any decision that we're making as a team, thumbs up is I'm all in. I've voiced what I needed to say, and I can fully commit to this decision. Thumbs sideways is I've voiced my concerns. I can commit to where we're going. And thumbs down is nope, I know things I've said, or I haven't shared what I need to share before I can make a decision to this. And the idea is until everyone is thumbs up or thumbs sideways, we need to have more discussion. And we use this as quickly as what do we want for lunch for a team meeting, or what are we going to do regarding policies, or it can be as serious as we need to, make a big shift in the services that we're going to offer. So we do this multiple times throughout our meetings and in facilitated discussions. But it also just gets a way to say, I might not be fully aligned with where we're going, but I voiced my concerns and I can get on board. As we kind of round out these different strategies and ideas, I guess before we get into questions, what other things do you guys do on your teams or don't do on your teams to help facilitate healthy conflict?
I think fist to five is something that we do. So the fist to five is, again, similar to the thumbs up, thumbs down, and really using that for moving on from a decision or pausing and really hearing from the group. And it just takes a little bit more time. But I worked for an organization where they actually eradicated Robert's rules on their board and started moving towards more fist to five and conversation consensus building among their board members in order to build more of an inclusive engagement, as well as having like healthy conflict and talking about it.
Nice. So I'm unfamiliar with that concept, although I can imagine what that would look like. How do you guys use it in practice?
Yeah. So if there's a decision made or folks are trying to decide on anything, they'll ask for folks to share where they're at in terms of agreement. So a fist is basically 0. They don't agree. They're in kind of in the red and they need to talk about it.
Yeah. 5 is
full agreement. Let's move ahead, to the next decision point or topic. And then folks who are in the 3s, the 2s, 3s, they would share why they're in the middle, what information they need or what they need the group to discuss before making another decision on committing to the decision.
I love that. So at the end of the conversation, is the goal that everyone's at a 5?
4 or 5, or comfortable enough to move on. Yeah. And it moves away from this democratic voting too, right? Of how many majority vote. So getting those nuances out on the table and getting that opportunity for people to share their own perspectives in case the facilitation process doesn't allow for them to share what their opinions and their needs are in that moment.
Yeah, I really like that. It's a good visual too, and a little more informative just than here.
Thank you for sharing that. Lindsay, or is that your name?
Yes, Lindsay.
Awesome. I would add in that like what I do and what is like kind of just getting a team or getting us back to like our shared values and vision. And if there's some conflict or some tension coming up. So just kind of like recommitting to that, maybe reading that out loud. And then, yeah, like, and then kind of, so it's just kind of taking that pause and then being able to kind of get back to, whatever we're talking about.
I think we must have a lot of one-on-one conversations, separating the team apart. So if there is conflict, it seems like it gets managed more on an individual level than on a group level for the most part. So maybe it's an avoidance of some sort. I'm not sure.
Maybe. I mean, I think on our teams, one of our conflict norms is go direct and in person whenever possible. So our goal is to really foster, and we've made a team agreement of if I'm having a conflict, I'm going to go directly to you. So again, maybe it's an avoid style, but not every decision needs to be belabored with everybody. Yeah, that can be effective too.
Right. Yeah. If I have a problem with organizational practices, then I talk to my supervisor about it as opposed to bringing it up in a group meeting.
Yeah.
Unless I would get a green light to bring it up. But I think that is a starting point to minimizing like larger group conflicts.
I'm curious, I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit. A lot of times we'll present this information and a lot of the ideas really resonate. And then sometimes there's this very normal human experience, which I call the yeah, but, where it's like, yeah, that sounds great, but you don't know my organization. You don't know my boss. You don't know my coworker. So I'm curious in your experiences, both on what we've talked about earlier today and what you know to be true about organizations, what are some of the yeah buts that get in the way to bringing healthier conflict into your spaces?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yeah, I'll try to be less verbose. I think at times it's nice to, like, this information is nice to have and helpful, but there are real limitations as to our different environments that can get in the way. So I'm curious, what are some of those, like, yeah, that's nice, but this is where I'm getting stuck. How would you fill in that blank? Sarah said, I'd say if the leader does not feel safe and trustworthy. Absolutely. Those are super foundational. We talk about psychological safety is how I would name that. That can really get in the way for people feeling like they can have conflict.
I think about how to effectively incorporate and build and like this into a culture in the group work process. I think that's the most difficult is sometimes it's a one and done and great. Okay, now we know each other's and then let's try to keep an eye out for it. But then there isn't this sustainable or routine return to how are we practicing positive conflict and engaging in it? What's working well, what's not working well, and really like institutionalizing it into group work and organizational cultures.
So that accordion experience between individuals and the organization. We were once working with a client and they were doing a workshop through this, and a woman said, oh, I'm never going to commit to this kind of thing. And my boss was pushing her a little bit to say, can you tell me more? And she said, at my old organization, anytime we had a conversation like this, my boss would throw staplers at us. And so, like, I mean, I'm watching people's eyeballs open, but I think that is a really significant yeah, but as to what are the historical experiences that we're bringing into the room that inform our level of safety or willingness to fully participate? And how do we, as leaders and caring coworkers, not necessarily rescue, but acknowledge that we all have different ways of being in the world that are really going to influence these things too. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor just to other questions or wonderings as you think both about your own styles and what you would hope for your organizations in 2023. People are still throwing staplers some places, I think, unfortunately. Not these Good Business Colorado businesses, but what questions do you have?
How have you worked with organizations on implementing sustainable conflict, conflict integration or conflict agreements, so that it's enduring?
Yeah. So we usually use this tool to look at what are the styles. We primarily start with the executives or leaders of the organization, because we know that if there's not buy-in at the top, it's really hard to get buy-in in different levels of the organization. So the conflict norms is a great place to start. We also have facilitated sessions to establish what we call rules of engagement. What are we going to hold each other accountable to? How are we going to behave? And oftentimes those are linked in service to values and ways of being as well. I think you were naming some really good questions too about like what's working and what's not working, and what's missing or unclear is a third question that we add in. And we bring those into our monthly check-ins. So we have company playbooks looking at how are we systematizing these kind of softer skills, so to speak. So this information is really the foundation of that conversation. And then we work with leaders to figure out what they know to be true about their organizations and cultures and what they want to carry forward.
Thank you.
Yeah. Another thing that I'll add to that is a lot of times we have, these aspirational values that we stick up on fancy stickers on the wall or posters on the wall. But one of the questions that we go through as a team is, what is a story where you saw or heard something that iterates our company values being lived in action? And I think you can change that to what is a story that you heard or saw our healthy conflict happening, and naming that in bigger meetings or organizational structures, like asking supervisors to highlight that in their one-on-ones, like this is something you did really well. So just the power of naming those experiences in storytelling fashion can help it start to feel a little bit more real. How have you supported orgs in understanding self-regulation skills in the face of conflict and safety? Say a little bit more about what you mean with self-regulation, Sarah.
Just in terms of like the actual understanding the body and the nervous system, and how again, just how we might be reacting to different types of conflict or the perception of conflict.
Yeah, so I guess I'm hearing kind of a somatic awareness, and then also different skills for naming. I will say two things. One, I continue to be really encouraged and also surprised at the lack of awareness that people have, especially about their own strong reactions. And so I think leaders can do a really beautiful job of naming it for themselves and modeling for others. If you're in a tense conversation, even this week, our leader said, wow, I can tell I'm having some tightness in my chest, and I just want to name that in front of everyone. So it's not weird. It's an organic part of the process. I think, as I'm sure you know, people have a wide variety of experience, both in self-awareness, and then there's their emotional intelligence too. And so I think if people are really struggling with I can't even identify that other people are upset, I do believe it is the leader's job to stop and pause. And, I was working with a client this week, and one of the members was really having a hard time, couldn't make eye contact, was shutting down. And we just had to pause the meeting and say, so-and-so, what do you need? We can tell that you're suffering in order to continue this meeting. And we could only do that in a context where there was high psychological safety. This wasn't punitive. It was really in service of, we care about you and we want you to be here. So there's a lot of nuance to this, and I think individual coaching on those ideas, I don't have necessarily a blanket response, but I think in terms of what can you as the leader model, or what can you as a coworker model, just that to be true about yourself. And then Caitlin Walker is out of the UK, and she does fantastic work in what she calls clean questions. And her idea is, you might say safety, and that means one thing to you. And I say safety, and that means something totally different to me. So she has a framework around using metaphor to help people understand what are the layers of nuance. And I mean, I think we could do the same thing. If I ask the question, conflict to you is like what? We're all going to have different ways that we fill in that blank. And it's in that space that there's a lot of juicy material that we can come to greater understanding. So even asking questions around that, around conflict to you is like what? Or healthy conflict to you is like what? And I would guess some people are like, I have no idea. I've never experienced healthy conflict. One other way to systematize this too is having a symbol or an indicator that everybody knows and can access in your meetings. So at Trebuchet Group, we have a bell that sits on the middle of the table. And if conflict is getting to a place that's like turning interpersonal or people are spinning, all of us are invited to ring the bell at any point and say, I think we need to step back, ask for others' perspectives, or maybe this is turning into some personal conversation that you two need to take off the table or take offline, whatever metaphor you want to use there. And we also have a set of like kids Hulk hands, like the superhero Hulk. And those sit on our bookshelf, and each of us at any point are invited to like go and get the Hulk hands and be like, okay, you need to put on the hands. And they're not going to duke it out and punch each other, but it's really this symbol of like, how do we add some more levity into this process? How do we invite others into the conversation? And when those Hulk hands get invited, again, in an environment of like high psychological safety, it's a chance to just kind of diffuse some of the tension. So those are two things that we do. I know we're reaching the end of time here. I'm curious, as a result of today's content, I am going to try, and I'd love for you to fill in the blank and either share that out loud or put it in the chat. Using more humor. Thanks, Christopher. Actively call out when a tense moment is happening. Recognize the feeling it generates. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. I appreciate those who are brave enough to share. And for those who are just taking notes and being here too, sometimes silence is a caring choice as well. So I want to acknowledge that. I'm going to go ahead and put up my contact information. If you have questions or even want a free, no obligation 20-minute coaching session around some ideas of how to bring more conflict into your workplaces, I would love to do that with you. I will also be on site tomorrow, so I hope we can have a conversation. Feel free to come up and introduce yourselves. I'd love to see you there. Thanks so much for your time, and have a great rest of your day learning and picking up new ideas from today's conference. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Stacy.